Hello, everybody, and good evening, and welcome to the Cheese and Grain. I'm Fiona Barrows. I'm an independent Frome Town councillor. There is a general election on Thursday. Don't know if any of you noticed. And here in Frome, we'll be voting in the new constituency of Frome and East Somerset for the very first time. This is a hustings for that election, and it is hosted by Frome Town Council. And is therefore primarily aimed at supporting the people of Frome to make a decision as to how to vote on Thursday and to hear from the candidates about issues that matter to and affect our town. As we are hosting it, we hope that everyone in the room, but particularly the candidates, will respect our values of inclusivity, fairness and honesty. All 7 candidates are here tonight, and they are in alphabetical order from my near left. Martin Dimery from the Green Party, Gavin Heathcote, who is an independent candidate, Sean Hughes, an independent candidate, Robin Moss from the Labour Party, Anna Sabine from the Liberal Democrats, David Swain from Reform UK, and Lucy Trimnell from the Conservative Party. So welcome, and thank you all very much for coming. On to how tonight will work. We have 8 questions for the candidates this evening. We asked all of you for your questions and then chose a selection to provide a good mix of subjects. We haven't told any of the candidates the questions beforehand. I will ask each of them in turn and mix up the order in which I do so. Candidates, please do make sure that you answer the question and that you also focus on what you and your party, if you're a part of one, will do for Frome, not what other parties or candidates may or may not do. Each candidate will have 90 seconds for each question. We want to give all of you a fair opportunity, so please do stick to that. Peter, who is here in the front row, will hold up a yellow warning card when you have 30 seconds left and a red warning card for when your time is up. I'll be stopping you when he raises his red card, so please do respect that and don't be offended. Right, are there any questions from anyone? Is everyone happy? Okay, let's get started. So as chair, it's my prerogative to ask the first question, which is that politics is as much about people as it is about parties. So why are you the best person to represent this wonderful town? And I'm going to go to Anna, first of all.
Hi, nice to meet everyone. So I'm not quite sure what's going on with this microphone. So why am I the best person to represent this amazing town? Well, I'm not a career politician. I haven't stood for anything before, actually. I was once a paper candidate in my teens, but apart from that, I haven't stood for anything. And that's because I've been busy running businesses, being involved with charities, supporting other female entrepreneurs with an organisation I set up called the Female Edge, and raising my children. And I feel like it's really important in politics these days that we have some more non-career politicians in politics. I think the world would benefit from them more. So I think I bring a wealth of expertise and experience from the real world. And critically, the thing that interests me about being an MP is the really positive effects that MPs can have at a local level. I know from speaking on the doorsteps, you speak to people and they say, oh, David Heath, he was an amazing MP, he really helped my family with X, or Sarah Dyke helped my family with Y, and that's not supposed to be a party political point. There's Jacob Rees-Mogg helped people with his constituents as well. And I think MPs can have a really massively positive local effect. And I'm also excited by the fact that, depending on what happens legislatively, there's always a chance you can input into some really important national legislation as well. So I'm really keen to serve Frome and East Somerset to the best of my ability.
Thank you. David, over to you.
Thanks. I think everybody here is local. Everybody here has a huge contribution that they can make. I don't think it's an easy question to answer of what an individual can do, because I believe that every single one of us here, if elected, would work incredibly hard for the people of Frome and the rest of the constituency. To suggest that I would somehow be a better individual or work harder than any of these things, my colleagues here would be disingenuous. I think the key thing is that if you go for somebody where you believe in the policies, you trust that person's judgment, you believe that they are an honest person, and I believe that everybody on this table here is an honest person, I think that you put your faith in who best you believe you fall in line with. I think if you don't believe in the policies of Reform UK, I'm probably not the person you should be voting for. My attitude with this is very much a case of stick with your principles, vote with your heart, and vote for who you believe will be your best representative.
Thank you. Gavin, over to you.
Okay. I don't know whether this is working. Everybody hear me? Okay. Cool. politics for local people is great for independents because that's what we're focused on. Nothing other than you, people. And I didn't know anything about party politics at all, or politics in general, until about 2019 when I stood for my local parish council. Everything about me, I've been called a community activist. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but everything about me is about doing what I think is right in conjunction with people who live, breathe and work in the same community that I do. So everything I do is based around people that I engage with and people that I speak to on a daily basis and people that I work with. I run a local charity, I run a community library, I work 60 hours a week, I sit on a parish council, I sit on Bath and North East Somerset Council as an independent. So everything that I'm focused on is about bringing politics to local people and listening to local people and interacting and engaging with local people. Thank you.
Thank you. Lucy.
Thank you. So throughout the last my adult life really, I've spent my life looking around and going, well, why does that happen? Who put that there? Why do people do this? Who is in charge? And that was what encouraged me in the end to stand to be a councillor. So I'm a councillor for Wincanton and Bruton. And I found out very quickly that without all of those layers, without those parish councillors, without the district and now the unitary councillors, things don't happen. And obviously we've been watching from afar, all of us, from our TV screens as we've seen all of the things that have happened in politics over the last few years, the frustrations and the irritations. And I got to a point where I felt, I can't keep complaining about this. I'm a councillor, I'm already in a position where I can spring myself forward and do something and be part of it and try and be a force for change. I've always had an eye on service, so I served in the Royal Navy, I've worked in education, I've always been there working for people. It was just a natural continuation for me, and that's why I want to be the MP for Frome and East Somerset, to help work with you.
Thank you. Martin.
Yeah, thank you. I think the question is perhaps a little bit unfair because you mentioned Frome. It's Frome and East Somerset, and I'm very conscious that I've lived in Frome for a very long time. In fact, Mrs. Thatcher was in her pomp when I first came to Frome, so that tells you something. But this is Frome and East Somerset. We've got big communities in Radstock, Midsummer Norton, Peasdown, St John, and of course rural communities to the south of this. And you have to try and represent all of them. I've worked here for a long time. I actually worked in this building, which was quite interesting. We're following in some very hallowed footsteps on this stage tonight, as I expect you know. And I'm deeply grateful that I'm not running the Frome Festival this year because I think I'd find Friday just a bit too much pressure in the circumstances. I stood for the Green Party in the County Council elections for Somerset in 2017, was elected with a chap called John Clark, who we were the first two two Greens ever on the council, and stood again in 2022. I think I'm very familiar with a lot of the issues and the problems that Frome will face in the future, and I'm familiarising myself with the entire area, and I hope that experience will come in useful.
Thank you. Robin.
Thank you very much. My name's Robin Moss. I live down in Radstock, and I'm standing because I believe I bring a wealth of experience, hopefully, to the role as an MP. There's also my background is I've never been any good at looking at the world and thinking, that's wrong, there's nothing I can do about it. I've always tried to be involved, whether it's my local community or as a local councillor. My background is I was a carpenter before industrial injury meant I had to retrain, and then I worked for many years in the not-for-profit sector, setting up and managing advice centres, particularly providing advice and support for young people. Involved in my local community, I chair a regeneration partnership down in Radstock and Westfield. It's brought £1 million worth of money into the community, invested in our local health centre. And that goes back years as well, being a community activist. I'm also a Bath and North East Somerset councillor, where I lead the Labour opposition to the Lib Dem administration, and I'm a parish councillor as well. And it does come back to that experience that I have of, I believe, delivering and getting things done, because I am no good at just sitting back and saying, you know, why is this happening? I always want to, myself and working with people, to actually say, we can change this.
Thank you. And Sean, finally.
Thank you. For those who don't know me, I'm Sean Hughes. I'm a councillor on Bath and North East Somerset Council. I'm also the group spokesperson for the independent councillors of Bath and North East Somerset. I'm also a local businessman. I run a business in aerospace electronics. And I'm very active in terms of the committee side of council. I sit on the planning committees, I sit on the licensing committee, I sit on scrutiny panels. So I'm very active, particularly on the housing and the planning side. I'm quite an advocate for sorting out our issues with social housing and issues of development of green space. The question about a person rather than a party is quite core to one of the reasons I'm here, and I do believe that we should be voting for a person and not a political party. The reason for that really is that I feel that we need an MP that's representing us by going to London and representing our views rather than having views placed upon us by London, by political parties. So that's really it in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, the first question from the floor, from the audience, comes from Bob Ashford. If you could put your hand up and we'll get a mic to you. Brilliant. I don't think it's on. Try it now.
Oh, they turn it on in the background. Okay, Frome has a housing crisis. Whilst hundreds of houses are being built around the town, the price of these and rentals are beyond the reach of many people on lower incomes. We often hear of how parties are going to encourage affordable housing, which is still beyond the reach of most people. What are you going to do to help people on lower incomes find secure housing that they can actually afford in Frome?
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob. And we're going to go to Lucy first.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a huge problem. Obviously, Frome Town Council announced or declared a housing emergency last year, and there are some real problems. What tends to happen is that developers find that they're unable to meet their contributions for the social housing that they've committed to, and often those numbers get rolled back on, and that really needs to be committed to in those early stages and held. As a party, we've actually built, or had built, a 697,000, near enough, affordable homes since 2010. Some for rent, some for social rent. This needs to be improved. This number needs to be increased. We need to see a higher number within those housing figures because we are struggling for housing for people on lower incomes. We also are offering 95% mortgages for key workers as part of a scheme of a 30% discount in order to make sure that our teachers, our doctors and people like that are more able to buy homes in the places that they need to live.
Thank you. Martin, over to you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, the Green Party policy is about the right house, the right place at the right price. All houses should be sustainable. Our building regulations should include solar panels, should include proper insulation, should include air source heating as standard. I'm on the planning committee at Somerset East, so I have to deal with a lot of these. We always face this conundrum of wanting to develop houses because we certainly need more houses for rent in the rental market, particularly. I think there's a big issue about what is affordable. We don't know what affordable is. Affordable seems to be becoming less and less affordable all the time, and developers are allowed to get away too much with housing estates with 4-bedroomed detached houses on them, rather than the sort of places that people can live in as first-time buyers or renters. I've fought very hard to try and get the right development for Saxonvale, and that is still up in the air at the moment. The development in Saxonvale is very important to this town. We must make sure that those houses are affordable, and we will always have the problem of, do we build on brown belt, green belt land? And we've got a big planning application for Selwood Garden Community coming up very, very soon. And as much as we need houses, what is the price of that? Certainly, we could do with more infill in towns, and we can do with houses possibly being built in London or developed in London from other buildings.
Thank you, Martin. Robin, over to you, Robin.
Thank you. 2 parts to my answer. First of all, developers are more interested in building for profit than they are for building the houses that we as a community need. And the second part is that developers too often, going through the planning process, will offer the moon and the stars when it comes to the infrastructure, the social housing and the rest. And I think you find out once they get permission, you get half a candle and a dodgy light bulb. So 2 parts to solutions. First of all, and it's in Labour's manifesto, we need to be building social housing that is protected from right to buy so that we don't lose it by purchase. And I argue in the Labour Party that the definition of affordable should not be related to house prices in the area, it should be related to wages in an area, so that people can actually afford to buy housing. So I'd say that there's an enforcement issue with developers, that when permission is given, whether it's at Saxonvale or whatever, that the commitment to infrastructure improvements should be in place before housing is built, that it should be legally enforceable, and that it should be communities determining what kind of housing is wanted and what kind of housing is needed, not developers looking to land bank and grab profits.
Thank you. Sean.
Thank you. Well, I think we've got a major problem with the governments that are imposing huge house building targets on us without any real correlation to the amount of social housing that's provided. So we get these huge numbers handed down from London telling us that we have to build houses, even with the 30% social and affordable that developers are supposed to supply. It still won't meet the social housing needs. So the system is broken. We need to be concentrating on building social housing. We need a government-led scheme to build social housing, and that needs to be the baseline for how many houses we build and where we build them. Too many green spaces are going to be destroyed in the coming local plans to build houses that are probably inappropriate. And as we know, developers use all sorts of tricks like viability reports to avoid having to provide the social and affordable elements. The other thing is that we're very busy building council estates and housing estates, but we're not building communities. So there needs to be an emphasis on building communities, not just housing.
Thank you. Anna, over to you.
Thanks. So I live in private rented accommodation, which is a nightmare, and I have 2 teenage children, and much as I love them, I think they're going to be living with me for the next 20 years at this rate, because I'm not sure how they're ever going to afford to privately rent or certainly not own a house. So I feel very strongly about this issue. There's a structural problem in this country, which is that housing is a social good, and we've handed it over to the private sector. And we've also asked the private sector to deliver social housing. So if big private developments don't go ahead, we don't get the social houses. And now, because there's a crisis in how affordable housing providers are funded, they are acting more and more like private developers. So the system's totally broken. And we also have local authorities, which are totally underfunded. And so we have planning officers, which, despite their best efforts, have rings run around them by the viability consultants of the big developers. So what can we do about it? Well, the Lib Dems have committed to a massive house building programme if we were elected, 350,000 houses, of which 150,000 would be social houses, proper social affordable houses. We want We want local authorities to have more control over where second homes can be built, which I think could be important for areas like Frome and short-term lets. But also critically, we want to see a much braver discussion about new settlements. What doesn't work and what you can see doesn't work in places like Frome is just tacking another 300 houses on the edge all the time with no infrastructure and no support for local communities. So we need to have a really grown-up discussion about some really well-planned new settlements, which some local authorities are going to have to be pretty brave about to get delivered.
Thank you, David.
Thanks. My views on this are going to be ever so slightly different because I don't think that subsidised housing is always the answer. Development is supply and demand led. Yes, developers do want to make a lot of money. That's what they're in it for, and we can't blame them for doing that. I think one of the issues that we've got, and I deal with this every single day. Let me finish. Every single day because I work in property. We are seeing, there you go, yeah. But trust me, I'm not just feathering my own nest here. The simple fact of the matter is that when you have less housing stock, prices go up. That's a fact. If you've got, the big issue we have with the private rental sector at the moment is that a lot of our landlords, and we're finding this every day, are finding that being private landlords is becoming more and more hassle. Increased government regulation, there's a lot of different things that are making it far more complicated to be private landlords. Now, whether or not you think it's right that they continue to do so or not is irrelevant. If they decide that it's not worth the aggravation, they won't do it. Deregulation allows private landlords to continue with what they want to do, which means they want to keep renting out their properties. If they don't, they sell them. And if they sell them, you get less rent. And if you get less rental properties, the housing price for those rentals goes up. The average 3-bed semi in the area is over £1,000 a month, which is disgusting. But it's happening because there's less rental properties available. So you need to make it more palatable and appealing for private landlords to have those rental properties, and it will push those rents down.
Thank you, David. Gavin, finally.
Okay. Everybody throws this word around, affordable. Affordable is only affordable when you've got money. If you've got no money, nothing's ever affordable, is it? The actual housing crisis currently in the UK stands at 4.3 million houses. That's how many we are short. And it's going to take us the best part of half a century to catch up. Now, everybody keeps going on about social housing and housing developments, and we get these big plots of land that are taken up by these 3- and 4-bedroomed homes. We don't need 3- and 4-bedroomed homes. I know that up on Saxon Vale here in Frome, as far as I'm aware, the people that live in the community here haven't been consulted as much. I know Martin does his bit, but you guys are the people that know what's required here. And 3- and 4-bedroom homes and things like that aren't required. So I've spoke to a lot of people on doorsteps with regards to what is required, and we've got lots of people that are fighting for the same sort of thing. So we've got up-and-coming people that want to purchase homes, 1- and 2-bedrooms, and then we've got people in bigger properties that want to downsize, but they can't downsize. Now, just to finish off, Labour also announced today that they've unveiled plans to stop local councils blocking developments on green belts.
Thank you. Right, the third question is from Katie Jones. If you could put your hand up over there. The microphone is on its way.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Can you explain your approach to supporting better energy efficiency in the community, and in particular what you would do to enhance the energy efficiency for community buildings, such as the Merlin Theatre, other public buildings and our homes?
Thank you, Katie. So I'm going to come to Robin first.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. Any new builds should include buildings that are energy efficient and that are energy sustainable. I think public buildings should be subsidised in order to make them energy efficient, because that's a short-term investment for a long-term gain. And also the schemes that are in place at the moment offering insulation of homes need to be extended. I also know that there is giving the people the opportunity to energy check their homes. In some of the villages in the north of the constituency, people can have their homes thermally imaged to actually see where the energy is going out. And people have actually been surprised at where energy is leaking out from their buildings. So it's actually giving people the tools to know where they should be investing and where they should be insulating. But there's also, I think, the issue about local energy generation, because if we're using solar panels, if we're using wind turbines on houses, and with the proper storage, that people can be generating their own energy on their own homes, which will add to that efficiency through the system. Thank you.
Thank you. Sean, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, first of all, yes, I mean, certainly local authorities should be leading by example, and we should be making sure that our own buildings are in order before we start preaching to the public about what they should be doing with theirs. Obviously, insulation is quite key to this, and it's a shame that the government schemes keep lapsing. We should be encouraging that. I know that both Baines and Somerset have looked at their local policies on building standards to improve the quality of builds. I would say that's generally a good thing. I think we need to be cautious because in the process we are also making house building more expensive, which in turn is having a knock-on effect on younger people being able to access the housing market. I mean, if you're looking at £1,000 for a gas boiler as opposed to £7,000 or £8,000 for an air source heat pump. But again, that's a problem that perhaps needs to be dealt with by subsidy by the government. But generally, yes, and I think on the overall issue of energy, we need to look at renewable energy, but it also needs to be UK owned. We don't need big power plants owned by Chinese and French consortiums. Thank you.
Thank you. Anna.
Well, I don't think developers need any more subsidy. I don't know how many millions Taylor Wimpey made last year, but I think they're doing okay. And they've been helped significantly by their mates in government, so I think they're all right on that front. Look, I think developers are very adaptable. Developers can make a profit whatever situation you give them. So I actually think there should be much stricter requirements on developers, as I think someone just said actually, to put this stuff in at the start. There's no reason they can't. They have the technology. They will do whatever you tell them to do, so just tell them to do it. Another thing that was mentioned was local authorities. I mean, I agree, local authorities should lead by example, but it's very hard to do that if you've got literally no money. We haven't talked very much in this election about the fact that many of our local authorities are imminently going to go bankrupt. So we need to see a better settlement for local authorities to make sure that they can maintain their buildings in an appropriate way. The Lib Dems also want to roll out an emergency insulation upgrade programme for those on low incomes to make sure that their insulation and they can have heat pumps in their homes if they need to. And finally, I would just say we need to be much more open to renewables. The government's restriction on renewables needs to be lifted. We'd like to see 90% of our electricity being generated from renewable sources by 2030, which is very achievable. So this is a complex picture, but there's definitely more that could be done on all of this.
Thank you. David.
Oddly enough, I do actually agree with some of what the panel have said in terms of making new housing as efficient as possible. Technology obviously has moved on significantly in recent years, so certain levels of insulation. I have no objection to properties being told to put solar panels and things onto properties to make them more energy efficient. I don't necessarily think subsidies are the answer, but I think that certainly what Anna said is correct. Developers do certainly have the flexibility to do this. They just need to be persuaded rather than forced, I think, is the best route. I think that certainly when it comes to energy, it is one of the biggest costs that people face every day. Reform's made it abundantly clear that rather than just giving out more subsidies and more money and more handouts, we'll simply scrap VAT on domestic energy bills so that people can save that money and spend it how they deem fit rather than giving it to the government and taking it back as yet another handout.
Thank you. Gavin.
For fear of going round in circles, everybody here is going to say better heat pumps, better insulation, houses that are built to last. My day job, I deliver with an articulated lorry into London, and I deliver concrete blocks, and I was fascinated by how houses are built. And I was speaking to a builder who's building the houses, and he said, the houses are only built to last the length of your mortgage. After that, you should get rid of them and build a new house, and that's how they're built. So very little goes into building a house that's long-lasting. So we need to be building houses that are built to last. Victorians did it all right, not very well insulated and various other things, but they should be built to last. We should be putting things like solar panels over car parks, over public spaces. I sit on a parish council where a group of people have come together and we've got solar panels through grants and better insulation going into our local buildings. So it takes a lot of people to stand up and make a stance and say we want better, and we're only going to do that if we can all come together and we can all agree that things need to change, and we all stand together to make them changes happen.
Thank you. Lucy.
So we have a £6 billion investment into improving the insulation of homes, of people's homes. That's really important. The difficulty that we face at the moment is that retrofitting homes, particularly Victorian properties, terraced properties, and places like that, becomes very, very complex, very expensive. Often there isn't the space. The technology still needs improvement. It does work, but I was speaking to somebody the other day who had an air source heat pump who's actually had to go back to having a boiler fitted as well because it just wasn't keeping the house warm enough. There is work that's being done on that. That technology is rolling on and it is improving. In newer houses, I have no problem with it. I think it's a great idea to have that installed at source. I just think the greatest difficulty is going to be for people actually retrofitting it. You spoke about businesses as well. There are the energy efficiency ratings, and we have to make sure that businesses are encouraged, persuaded, to make sure that their buildings are also energy efficient, in order to make sure that we reduce those bills as much as anything, because it's always the cost to people as much as the cost to the environment.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. And Martin, to you.
I'd like to come back to the question, which was fairly specific to a local area. You're sitting in a building which actually had some development put into it. Several years ago, the town council, I was not a member of the town council, so I can say this in its wisdom, decided to pay for the solar panels that you can see on that side of the roof. That investment came at a time when there was subsidy. It paid itself off in 6 years. That now belongs to this community and it subsidises this building. The question was asked about the Merlin Theatre. The Merlin Theatre in Frome is in a somewhat dilapidated state. It needs investment. The school will soon become an academy, and it won't have the safety net that was there of council support, although there's not much of a safety net anymore, I'm afraid. So we've got to return to being able to subsidise and incentivise our towns and our councils into helping businesses and industries and public spaces to get their energy efficiency right. And if you're worried about subsidy, think about how much we subsidise North Sea oil and gas.
Thank you all very much. So question number 4 comes from Hilary Lang. If you could put your hand up in the centre. Thank you.
We all know that our public services, national and local, from an overwhelmed NHS to closed down libraries and playgrounds, are in a state of desperate decline. Candidates from every side are promising improvements, even if not immediately, but this will need a huge injection of funding. The poorest 50% of the UK population share only 9% of the country's wealth, while the richest 10% own 43%. How will you change our system of taxation so the wealthiest contribute more of what they can well afford to the cost of adequately running the country, so we can recover from the awful state of private wealth and public squalor into which we've sunk?
Can I add in a question?
Yeah.
There was a lot of questions.
Thank you. I'm just going to repeat the question because the microphone was cutting out a bit, and I do have slightly different wording in front of me, but it's a similar sort of, yes. So the question was, we know that all public services in the UK, national and local, are in a state of desperate decline. How will you change our system of taxation so the wealthiest contribute more of what they can well afford to the cost of adequately running the country, and we recover from the awful state of private wealth and public squalor into which we slipped? And that was a question from Hilary. So, Martin, back to you.
Thanks. Yeah, brilliant question, actually. Well, one of the answers the Green Party has is it's not afraid to say we're going to put up taxes, but we're going to put up taxes where we should be putting them up. We will put 1% on the income tax for people who have more than £10 million in assets, and 2% for those billionaires. In this country, not just in the last 14 years, probably going back to the Blair years, we've seen an exponential growth in the number of extremely rich people in this country. And it's been going on for too long. We've also seen 30% of our children are now in official poverty. It's appalling. And I think there are many wealthy people out there who are quite willing to pay a little bit more tax. And I think we should shut the loopholes as well, of course, on offshore investments to try and get more money into the exchequer. We also have a plan to raise national insurance for people earning over $50,000. Now, that may seem unpopular with some, but it is a rather unfair tax because it stops. It doesn't get any more once you get over a certain salary. And surely we should all be paying tax in a respective rate to what we earn. I think I'm out of time.
Thank you. Robin, over to you.
Thank you. I think the key to tax is to collect it. It is not good enough that just because people have money and can afford accountants that they can buy themselves loopholes. It needs to be the case that income tax should be and taxes should be collected, and that government can invest in tax collection, and that becomes efficient because the money you put into tax collection you get 5, 10, 20 times over in collection, something I'm afraid this government is not doing. It also means that it also involves having a better relationship with our European partners, because we're not the only country in Europe to have this problem, and working together we can look to actually close down those tax havens and those tax loopholes with our partners across Europe. When it comes to local councils, as a councillor, I'm very well aware how local councillors have been starved of money for the last decade, the last 14 years. Investment in local services pays dividends. When we have a population that is getting older and you want them to help them living at home, you need libraries, you need parks, you need support services because it saves you in the long term. And I will certainly, as a local councillor, advocate for investment in local councils as a way to save money.
Thank you, Robin. Sean, over to you.
Thank you. So the issue, one of the main issues is the fact that obviously we need to increase our income. And there are only two ways of doing that. You either do that through taxation or you do that by business growth. The political parties have been busy trading away half of the tools that they could use. They've already agreed that they're not going to increase taxation, national insurance, VAT. So they've already removed half the tools from their toolbox before they even start the job. So assuming that they can't use standard forms of taxation, they're now looking down the back of the settee looking for various ways of taxing certain groups of people, and then putting most of their eggs in the basket of hoping that we'll get business growth. But until they actually start tackling the issue of Brexit, they're not really going to achieve that. So unfortunately, the manifestos I've seen are financially flawed in both areas.
Thank you. Anna.
Thank you. We did a hustings at a school in Midsummer Norton a couple of weeks ago, and one of the students asked us what percentage of our political party's membership was in the top 1% of the wealthiest in the country, and did we think that had an influence on our party's policies? And I thought it was an extremely switched-on question from a young person, and I feel quite strongly that the priorities around wealth distribution in this country have unfortunately flowed very strongly from the people that have been running this country for the last 10 years, who I don't think are massively interested or bothered about wealth inequality, because I think they're largely benefiting from it. So, on the taxes point, the Lib Dems have a really neat one side of A4, if you'd like to look at it, that says we're going to spend £26 billion and here's how we're going to fund it. It includes things like reversing the cuts for banks, tax cuts for banks. It includes closing the loopholes at the top of capital gains. Absolutely right. Tax does need to be collected. I know as a small business owner and an individual, I fret and fret and fret about getting my tax paid on time. Yet if I'm running Amazon or Google, that doesn't seem to be an issue. I can just negotiate away half the debt. And then the other thing I would say, just as we're touching on wealth inequality, is the Lib Dems have some brilliant policies around things like ending the totally immoral and outrageous two-child benefit cap, which has thrown so many families into poverty. And we'd like universal credit to be available after 5 days, not 5 weeks. If you're in need of receipt of universal credit, you need it immediately. So I think there's a couple of different ways we can tackle all of that.
Thank you. David.
Thanks. What Sean said makes a lot of sense in terms of growth. Nobody wants to admit, although a couple have, that taxes are going to need to go up, and it's either tax, debt, or growth. But most of the parties don't seem to have a massively detailed plan about how they're going to stimulate this growth. Reform has been quite clear, far from simply just taking more money off the rich, which seems to be everybody else's idea. Is to suggest that actually we give tax breaks to the poorest people in the country by raising the tax threshold to £20,000 a year. This helps students, it helps younger people on lower incomes, and it helps pensioners. If people keep more of their own money, they can prioritise it in the way that they see more productive for them, rather than just taking more and more money and again giving it back in a way that the government deems a better way of doing it. Stimulating growth is key, and small businesses are the main factor in that. In terms of supporting high streets, we need to make sure that high street shops and businesses are supported. Reform has made it clear that they're going to reduce the burden on high streets by removing them from business rates for small and medium businesses on the high street, which encourage people to go back and open up there rather than outside of town. Raising the corporation tax threshold to 100,000, the VAT threshold to 150,000 takes a huge number of small businesses out of paying tax altogether, which stimulates local growth, which feeds its way up, which helps everybody.
Thank you. Gavin.
One of my core values is, and I love this saying, somebody said it to me quite a while ago, and it's think local to make a global difference. And that's what we need to do. We need to think local. And there were several parts to the question. Everybody's focused on the taxation system, but there was questions in there about the public services, about the NHS. And our councils and officials are squandering money away all over the place. And your council tax, 80p in every pound, goes to adult and children's social care. That leaves 20p to do everything else with. So they're looking at ways of raising taxes, and that comes from you guys, the hard-working individuals, and small businesses. So I would be lobbying government to alter the taxation system so that they lower the 45% tax rate of personal allowance and they higher the 40% tax rate, so that hard-working people get to keep more of their own money. I'd be calling on government to introduce a new grant subsidy scheme for small businesses who have less than 10 employees. The grant would be used to cover the cost of heating and electricity bills. To move legislation to ensure that local councils can't introduce parking charges in areas where there's a high proportion of small businesses. And call on councils to introduce rate relief for small businesses. Again, if we can think locally, we can make a global difference.
Thank you. And Lucy.
So, it's understood that, and I may have the statistics wrong on this because I haven't noted it down, but I believe it's something like the top 1% pay 30% of all taxes in this country. And you can pay more tax voluntarily. So if you are incredibly wealthy, you can. I mean, you just can. So if you are more wealthy and you feel that you want to make that contribution, it is possible to do so. The problem
Let's just wait. Let's hear from the candidate, please.
The problem is that the wealthy are highly mobile, and so if we overtax people, the wealthiest people, they will go, and that will leave the rest of us paying those other taxes. It's the truth. So, we've had difficult times, but the economy is now beginning to return to growth, and growth is going to be the way forward in this. We've been able to make an offer now that we will cut business rate for businesses, for retail and for hospitality. We've also said that we'll increase the VAT threshold for small businesses. We've already cut national insurance contributions to give people more money to spend, because at the end of the day, we spend our money better than how the government tell us to spend our money. And so that's what I believe will help to reduce that tax burden on people.
Thank you all. Right, on to the fifth question, which comes from Peter Clark. If you could, right down the front.
Could have just passed him round.
Thank you. Is this on?
Yes.
I've banked with the NatWest for over 40 years. In May 2023, they closed their branch in Frome, as did other banks, and this caused a great deal of inconvenience for people in Frome, especially the older generation. I asked an official of the bank, protested to him about this, and he pointed out to me that the bank was not a charity, but a business. In 2023, the NatWest Bank made a profit of 6.2 billion. And I wonder what the panel would do as MPs to ensure that banks operated in the interest of customers rather than shareholders.
Brilliant. Thank you for your question, Peter. So to Sean, first of all.
Thank you. This is a highlight, so quite a general problem we've got with our high streets. Banks will be where the footfall is, and if the footfall diminishes, which is what we've seen in our high streets, inevitably we lose them in the same way as we're losing a lot of activity for the high streets. We need more investment, more government-led investments in high street development, and we need to repurpose our developments to make them multifunctional, to make them both residential and commercial. And hopefully that will help to bring back some of the vital services that we need. I would also say that we need to make high streets more accessible. Ridiculous parking charges, which are forcing people to use out-of-town shopping rather than shop locally. All of these aspects are killing the high street, which in turn is killing things like banks and availability.
Thank you. Anna.
Thank you. This is an issue that's come up, actually, probably the highest issue that's come up at all on the doors, particularly in Frome, this and post offices as well, and kind of lack of local facilities. I mean, I don't think banks are leaving the high streets because the high streets are struggling. I think it's the other way around. I think banks have worked out that they can try and make us all go online and not provide face-to-face service, and that's much cheaper. And as a consequence, our high streets suffer because people aren't coming onto the high street to do banking. And that's certainly what business owners in Frome have said to me when I've been chatting to them. I did meet with an organisation that I'm sure most of you here will know called Prosper Frome about this, and I know they've been doing some amazing work to try and get a banking hub in Frome, and they've been very frustrated by the process, which seemed to consist of saying, we'd like a banking hub, please, and then Link, who organised it, saying, well, you can't have one until all your banks are shut. And they said, well, we're trying to plan ahead, can we have a banking hub earlier? And they said, no, you have to wait till you're really stuck, and then we'll think about letting you have a banking hub. I think that situation's improved since, but There's also an interesting thing with banks around cash. I know that it's not just certain types of people still like to use cash, but also businesses in the town are really struggling with not being able to do their banking locally. That means they're driving out of town to do banking. And so I totally agree. The Lib Dems are very big on digital, financial inclusion and making sure that all different types of the community are serviced by banks. We're not a friend of banks. We're proposing to remove a lot of their tax cuts. So I think it's a real issue around accessibility, and I totally agree with the questioner. Yes, an MP should be helping hold banks to account and make sure that they serve the public that they benefit from.
Thank you. David?
The tax incentives and support that banks do get from the government, I think is wrong. I think that banks, as the gentleman says, do act as a business, and therefore they should be allowed to continue as a business and be self-supporting. I think that there is a way, however, of saying, well, if the banks do want a certain amount of support, then they have to be giving something back to the community, because the government works for the community, not for the banks. So it is a shame when the high street banks close, and that is happening right the way across the county and the country. And I think that it's a mixed bag. I think the government has a responsibility to encourage, I won't say force, but encourage banks to retain branches on the high street. And you will see, actually, in a number of places. I know in Wells, for example, the Lloyds Bank does very well, and it does in Street as well, because I think it looked ahead and went, well, everyone else is closing. If we're the only bank left on the high street, everybody's going to come to us. And I think that has paid off to a degree. I think we as individuals have a little bit of responsibility and blame to take with this as well. I'm sure if I asked for a straw poll of hands of how many people use online banking, we'd see a lot of hands. It's efficient, it's helpful, but I think that sometimes, if we all took a step back in time a little bit and went to the high street to use our branches, we might find that they would be more inclined to stick around for a bit longer. So I think that the blame can be shared fairly equally, but we do need to do something to encourage the branches to stick on the high street.
Thank you. Gavin?
Thank you. And a great question. It's something that I feel quite strongly about. And one word springs to mind when we look at banks closing down on the high street, and that is control. And it's this control of forcing everybody into what they call this digital currency. So if we get rid of the banks and we force everybody to use digital currency, then we're being controlled. And we don't have control over our money. Somebody once said to me a while ago that if you get a £50 note and you go to a shop and you buy something for £50, you get the goods and you hand over your £50. That next person spends that £50, but there's always £50 going around. With a digital currency, you go and you scan your card and you get your goods, but the bank takes that little bit extra out of it in a charge. So 20 transactions down the line, there's no £50 anymore because the bank's had it all in charges and their little fees. The co-op is a great example. That started off years and years and years ago as this community project, and now has made millions and millions and millions, and is now running as a business and is now dictating to the people that were essentially part of this startup project, how it's going to run its thing. And again, it's closing stores, it's closing banks.
Thank you. Lucy?
So something that business owners have spoken to me about is the issue with losing the local banks. What they tend to do is they'll go to somewhere like Midsummer Norton, where you don't have to pay, for example. They go and park up. They were using the banks to deposit the takings that they've had that day. They can pop into other shops. Now that those banks are closing, they're having to take their takings further to other areas, eventually probably into our cities. This is going to dissuade them in the end from taking cash, and we're already seeing a number of places. I was in a coffee shop and some children had £10 and they ordered their drinks and they made the drinks, and then the children gave the money and they went, oh no, we can't take cash, I'm afraid. We can't. And they had the drinks. I mean, they had made them. They put them back on the side, and the children had to leave. Customers were saying, we'll pay, and they wouldn't have it. And this freezes people out, especially the very young and the very old. People are returning more and more to using cash nowadays for budgeting. Gosh, that's gone quickly. And so I think that we have a real issue here. I believe that we need to press for banking hubs. Only 5% of customers use their banking facilities, their in-person banking facilities. There's got to be a new solution. So that's my answer.
Thank you. Martin.
Yeah, thank you. My wife, who knows much more than me on most subjects, used to work at the Coventry Building Society. And she told me when the NatWest closed, they'll all go, you know, within a year. And she was absolutely right, because they follow one another. And when they turn around and say, but we're not a charity, well, you damn well were in 2010, weren't you? When we bailed the banks out. Where is the sense of public service? A town this size with no high street bank. It's appalling. I'm actually very much in favour of community banks as a possible development. I actually don't mind the idea of a national bank as well. And let's revamp the post office after the dreadful mess that's got into. No wonder nobody wants to become a sub-postmaster or mistress. So so I think the and one of the things for our shopkeepers in Frome, you know, that want to take cash and should take cash, why should they have to go to Trowbridge to actually bank the money? It's appalling. I'm glad to say that it's recommended that they do go to Midsummer Norton. It's nice that somewhere in the constituency actually has got a bank. The good news is that Coventry have taken over the co-op. Perhaps they'll open a branch here. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, to Robin.
Thank you. Let's remind ourselves, the banks aren't withdrawing from the high street because they're losing money. They're withdrawing from the high street because they want to maximise their profits. The banks aren't taking free accounts away from small charitable groups because they're losing money. They're doing it because they want to maximise their profits. And Gavin's quite right. They were quite happy to take handouts 15, 16 years ago when they were in trouble, and we should legislate now to make sure they should have a community function, and they should be donating to the community by making sure that services are available to all the community. Now, it's been mentioned about Prosper and the banking hub, and I think that's a great initiative. I think it should be, the idea of a banking hub should be allowed as a preventative measure if you think banks are about to leave, rather than after the event. And we should also be taking advantage of, if we're going to have a banking hub, let's involve credit unions and let's involve Citizens Advice Bureau drop-ins as well, so you can have that total financial literacy package. But don't anyone tell you that, oh, this is penalising private businesses, the poor old banks, because one thing the banks aren't is poor.
Thank you all very much. Question 6 comes from Natalie Barnett. Go.
What actions do you intend to take to support communities, businesses and ecosystems in adapting to the accelerating risks posed by climate change, such as flooding, extreme weather events, water scarcity, habitat and biodiversity loss and other environmental threats?
Thank you. I'm going to go to David, first of all, on that one.
I think most of the things that we can do in terms of combating the threats that were mentioned is working primarily with local areas and local authorities. Every county in the country, every region is going to be affected in different ways. If you're inland, you're going to be affected differently than you are on the coast. So I think that priority needs to be given on making it a very bespoke support package for individual areas so that they can provide the mitigating advances that they need for the area to fend off the challenges that are faced by changing weather conditions. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. I don't think it's a case if we just say, well, if we give everybody in the country a load more money, they can just solve the problems. I think we need to look at very specific areas that have very specific needs, work with them, work with local councils, the farming community, local infrastructure. The Somerset Rivers Authority is a particular organisation that obviously is focusing primarily on flooding here in Somerset and have done a great job over recent years. So I think that there is no one answer to that. It is a case of looking at bespoke areas and making the changes necessary for a specific locality and providing the funding where needed to do that.
Thank you. Gavin.
It pains me to say it, but I actually agree with reform. Biodiversity threats. I've got a very good friend of mine who's a farmer down in Wedmore, not too far from here. And one of the issues that he has is, down on the Somerset levels, as we're all aware, is flooding. And he's constantly fighting a battle to try and get areas dredged and waterways kept clear. So we need to invest in areas where there's a need. So if you look down in Wedmore, they need that investment to dredge waterways. If we look elsewhere, like David said, that there's a different need somewhere else. But again, we come back to the best possible people to speak to are the people that live in them areas. And they're the people that can tell us what's needed, what's required, and how we can best, so distracting that is, and how we can best help in them sort of areas. So, like I say, it pains me to say it, but I agree with David.
Thank you. Lucy.
So, we have an environmental plan for cleaner air and water, for tree planting, for protecting land, for trusting our farmers to do the right things for their land and to care for it in the way, because they are the stewards of our land effectively. We have committed to £3 billion to International Climate Change Fund because we have to recognise that this is an international problem, not just a problem in the UK, and we need to do what we can to help with forest preservation, marine conservation, and so on. We've so far beaten all our carbon delivery targets. We have the largest, the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth largest wind farms. So we are working and we are beating internationally on certain measures, and we continue to improve. We're the first of the developed nations to have already over halved our carbon emissions. We keep working towards that. That's what we have to do.
Thank you. Martin.
Yeah, well, in terms of biodiversity, I'm a chair of the Climate and Place Scrutiny Committee on Somerset Council. We've been talking a lot about biodiversity. One of the regulations that is being brought in at the moment is that for new building, that the biodiversity that's lost for putting out new houses and so on needs to be replaced plus 10%. In the Green Party, we'd like that to go up to 30%. So you try and replace it. Not as easy as it sounds, perhaps, but it's a plan. In terms of we need to accelerate the amount of renewable energy that we are producing in this country, and that can be done locally as well. There's no reason why there can't be schemes for town and area councils to get involved in more of that kind of subsidy, because it pays back in the long run. In terms of our water needs, we need to rethink. I mean, the thing about flooding is it's all tied in with the provision and the taking away of water, and the sooner we renationalise the water industry, the better. And Lucy's quite right, actually. Farmers are the custodians of the country. They have lost enormous subsidies that they used to get when we were in the European Union. And frankly, the sooner we get back in the single market and the customs union, the better.
Thank you. Robin.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, and it's probably one we could debate and discuss well beyond Thursday, and quite rightly will be discussing it well beyond Thursday's election. The danger is, of course, with climate emergency and climate change that it can all seem too big, it can seem too much, and it can seem too much out of our control. But there are things that we can do locally to contribute. An example is, for example, if we're going to have solar panel farms, don't put them on prime grade agricultural land and green belt. Look to what they do in Europe. We've got 2 supermarkets in Frome. Cover your car parks and put solar panels on top. We have got the old Somerset coalfields just north of here. There's drop pendulum storage and there's temperature exchange can be done in those old mine workings. That's a way of generating electricity locally. And why are they looking to expand the Nunny quarries when you could use the hot spring water under there for heat exchange for energy generation? There is a lot that we can do, and it is, and I'm sorry, going to pinch Gavin's phrase, which has gone back a few years, act locally, think globally.
Thank you. Sean.
Thank you. Well, we have a very limited amount of green space, and once it's gone forever, typically. We've got to balance the use of our land between agriculture, housing, industrial space, and power generation, solar farms. And at the moment, that balance is wrong. We're planning through government targets to build thousands and thousands of houses on green space, which is wrong. We also have this system whereby developers can offset the biodiversity net gain, not just to somewhere adjacent to where they're developing. It could end up being miles away, sometimes the other end of the country. So the biodiversity net gain needs to be developed close to the development they're talking about. One concern I have is Labour looking at relaxing planning regulations to allow more development to happen without the proper scrutiny. So I think that needs to change. I would agree with Robin on the solar farms. In fact, there's a very good development in Portsmouth where they've covered the buildings and the entire car parks in solar panels. So there are some good initiatives, but we need to protect our green space.
Thank you. Anna.
So I think Natalie's specific question was about what actions we would take to support communities and businesses to resist these threats. The first action, I think, would be to have a government that actually took these threats seriously in the first place and didn't just dump their environmental targets when they felt it was politically inconvenient. Secondly, I think we need to clearly prioritise climate change as an issue. We need to accelerate progress towards net zero. In terms of specific kind of local actions that can be taken, it strikes me that a lot of this stuff is around resilience, and that really would normally fall to people like your local council or kind of certain agencies. And as we've touched on before, these are all very poorly funded at the moment. I hosted a water summit recently with groups that were interested in the health of the river. And one of the things that came out really clearly is that actually organisations like the Environment Agency are just really struggling to operate at the moment with not enough staff and kind of demoralised staff. And if we're relying on those organisations like them and councils to prepare us for these threats and help us to understand how these threats are going to happen, then those organisations have to be supported. I also think the farming point's really interesting. I think farmers that I've spoken to feel there's very much an us and them thing at the moment, and that a lot of our national food security rests with them, and that we don't really understand the importance that they play in the community. So I think an MP could do lots of things around working with farming communities and helping them work with others. The final point I wanted to make was around, you specifically mentioned businesses. I chatted to the lady that runs the renewable shop in Frome, and she pointed out that her business is actually serving a huge social purpose and provides resilience and those kind of things. So supporting small independent businesses like her is another little thing we can do.
Thank you very much, everyone, for that. The seventh question is from Hugh Walters. If you could put your hand up. You're behind the camera.
If you were elected to Parliament and there was a free vote on the legalisation of assisted dying, how would you vote?
Right. So I'm going to go to Gavin first.
Thanks. One thing I feel really strongly about, is that we all have certain rights, what I believe are day one rights from the day that you are born. The right to live your life how you want to live your life, the right to, within the boundaries of the law, and the right to be free, and the right to choose. Now, if there's an open vote on assisted dying, would I agree with it? And that's the question. Yes, I would agree with it.
Thank you. Lucy.
So this is a question that pits two things against one another: the sanctity of life versus the dignity at the end of life. And I think probably most people have been touched by somebody they care about or they love dying without dignity, in terrible pain, and the kind of conditions or situation where we would often say you wouldn't do that to your family pet. And we don't think twice about taking our pets to the vets and having them put down to put them out of their misery. I think the argument around that is that as humans, we are able to understand the process that we're going through, understand what we're going through, and therefore make a choice. I haven't come to a massively definitive position on this, purely because I feel as though I haven't explored all of the arguments far enough. I do lean, and I've spoken to people on the doorsteps about this, I do lean towards yes, because I believe in the difference with humans in that we are able to say and express an opinion on what we want, and for so many people, they suffer for so long at the end of their lives, and for that reason, I lean towards yes, but I am open still to listening to the arguments.
Thank you. Martin.
These questions, the moral questions, are the hardest to answer, and it's not really an easy right or wrong. But I'm going to have to come down on the side of saying yes. I think probably many of us in this room, if not most of us, have been in the position where we've seen somebody dying, somebody we've loved very much, and we want to see them out of their misery. But it's really important that we give that person the opportunity and the right kind of advice. We do need to have some sort of break on that. There has to be a conversation and a consultation so that the person who wants to be relieved of their life can actually make a rational decision. Really difficult one. I have a brother with multiple sclerosis. He's okay, he's all right, he's managing well. But he tells me he's not going to wait around. He'll find a way of taking his own life. And I can understand that. I think we should help him, not hinder him.
Thank you, Martin. Robin.
Thank you. I would vote yes. I think that the points have been made about dignity of people's lives. The two caveats I would put on that is, first of all, need to make sure that there are protections in place for people who are vulnerable, and also that, as said, it should be a conversation rather than a quick decision. I think also it's asking the question about why someone will want to take this particular choice, and is there anything that we can do as a society, NHS or whatever, to actually improve the quality of people's lives. But overall I would say yes in a free vote.
Thank you. Sean.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm actually, my sister is a Macmillan nurse, and I understand how challenging this is for the staff, for the family, and for the people involved. So I think the right to choose is very important. I think there's enough case studies in other parts of the world now that we understand the pitfalls and we can mitigate against them. So I think with the right caveats, I think with the right safeguards in place, I think absolutely, I think we should say yes.
Thank you. Anna?
Yes, I'm inclined to say I would vote yes to that. Based on where I sit now, I would vote to legalise assisted dying. A couple of things on it, though. One is that I would be really keen to listen to the concerns of groups that are against assisted dying. I think certain communities have really, really valid concerns about what this might mean for them and their place in the world, and I think it's absolutely right that we listen to them and understand whether we can mitigate some of those concerns. The other thing I would say is I was in a situation at Christmas where this came up as an issue, and I was very struck by how different it is when you're in that situation than when you're talking about that situation. And again, I think that's a reason for making sure that we have incredibly strict safeguards and practices around this, so that in an incredibly emotional situation, the right decisions are taken for the person concerned. But yes, as a headline, I would vote to legalise it.
Thank you. And finally, David.
I think we're probably going to be pretty unanimous on this. Yes, I think that the main question around this is about safeguarding, as has been mentioned. I think that's where the debate really comes down to, is the restrictions and guidance around it. But I think everybody has a right to dignity in their final years, and if they are suffering from degenerative conditions. So I certainly think it's something that should be subject to a free vote. I think that MPs need to act on their conscience on this particular issue. And as Anna rightly said, you have to take in the views of all sections of the society, some of which you will not agree on it, and make a balanced judgment. But safeguarding is the key focus, and I think that's where the primary debate will lie. But yes.
Thank you. Thank you all. We are running very ahead of time, oddly enough. So all of our questions tonight have focused on local issues, but Frome is a town that cares a lot about people all over the world. So as we are running so ahead of time, we did get a couple of questions on one specific international issue, and I think Emily has a question about that, so I'm just going to allow that. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me yet?
Yes.
Thank you. Above the Old Bailey in London stands Lady Justice, a statue cast in Frome by Singer's Foundry in 1906 to symbolise British justice and integrity. She survived the Blitz. When you go to London to represent us, what will you do to fulfill your responsibility to uphold international law and protect the people of Gaza and other Palestinians from extreme risk of genocide after decades of illegal occupation and apartheid rule? How will you help bring freedom, justice and equality for Palestinians and a just peace for all in Israel-Palestine?
Thank you. So let's go to Lucy, first of all, on that.
So this is obviously a contentious issue. It's a very difficult one. At the heart of this, there are still over 100 hostages in Gaza who were taken on the 7th of October last year, who haven't seen their families, their loved ones, for hundreds of days now. And my belief is that those hostages need to be freed. They can be released by Hamas. Once they are released, I think that the ceasefire talks can start properly. We already have...
Can we please, let's hear from the candidates, please.
Once the ceasefire is underway and held by both sides, upheld fully by both sides, then I believe that the discussions can start to begin about how a lasting peace can be held in that area and a solution going forward.
Okay, David.
It's not going to come as a huge surprise. I'm going to agree with pretty much everything Lucy just said. A terrorist organisation cannot keep over 100 hostages still and then turn around and complain when the IDF and the Israeli government rightfully defend themselves and fight back. You cannot behave in that manner and expect not to receive punishment as a result. Any military campaign in Gaza by the EDF should, and we should of course encourage, where possible, to minimize civilian casualties. But I think that the fundamental principle here, and I can appreciate that not everybody's going to agree with me on this one, is that Israel was attacked first. It is responding in the way it deems fit. And if we were in a similar situation, I would hope that our government would respond in as just a way as they have.
Thank you. Anna, over to you.
Well, I don't agree with anything that's just been said. The situation in the Middle East is intolerable, and I'm really worried about the way it's sliding down the news agenda, as these things tend to do. As the longer they go on, the longer they just kind of slightly slip from our consciousness. I don't know if anyone clocked the Lib Dem Foreign Affairs spokesperson, Layla Moran. She's the UK's first British Palestinian MP, and she spoke very movingly about her family who were trapped there for some months hiding in a church. And she was very lucky to be able to help them get free, and she made the point that she had the advantage as an MP that she could do that, and hundreds of other families won't be able to. So the Lib Dem position on this is pretty clear, and I'm pretty proud of it. We were the first party to call for a bilateral ceasefire in the Middle East. We would like to see the release of the hostages as part of that, and we would like to cease arms sales to Israel while this situation continues as it is now.
Robin, over to you. Please, let's just hear from the candidates. Robin.
Thank you. The UN has called for a ceasefire and for the release of all hostages and prisoners, and that's something that Labour supports. And in the longer term, there has to be a two-state solution. The situation in the Middle East is a running sore and is intolerable. There is stuff that we can do locally, though, and that is actually supporting not only our Palestinian communities or diaspora within the UK, but actually offering support to refugees from Gaza. And as a Bath and North East Somerset councillor, I'm actually proud of how all the political parties on Baines have acted as a safe refuge, has acted a place of refuge for refugee communities. Tim Warren down there was Conservative leader of Baines Council when we provided sanctuary to refugees from Syria. I was proud to work with him as a Tory, and I think he should feel proud of himself. We've acted as a refuge for Ukrainian refugees, as I'm sure it has in Somerset, and I've also had a number of conversations with the current Liberal Democrat leader of Bath and North East Somerset Council to see if we can do the same for Palestinian families and children. There is stuff we can do locally.
Thank you, Robin. Sean.
Thank you. First of all, I would agree exactly with Robin on the work that Baines Council, as a Baines councillor, that Baines Council have done. With this awful situation, I see no reason for anyone to oppose a ceasefire. I think no matter what the cause, I mean, the killing of a child is an unforgivable crime, and there's no justification. And international law needs to be upheld. The politics of the region is hugely complex, and it's for people far better qualified than me to find solutions. It does seem that the two-state solution does seem to be the best way forward. As I say, it needs people that in the region to find the solution.
Thank you. Gavin.
One of the questions that I asked Tim Warren when I come in was whether he had any rotten fruit in his pocket. And after David's answer, I'm pretty certain everybody was searched because nobody's lobbed anything. So I'm pretty happy with that. Listen, mass genocide on any scale, and we're talking about Palestinians and Israel, but mass genocide on any scale is unforgivable and should be condemned by all international communities. It needs to stop, and sanctions and restrictions need to be put in place to anyone who cannot find a diplomatic solution. Now, I agree with what other people have said here, and a two-state solution is the best way forward. A wise old man once said to me, for as long as there is land, there will always be war. because people want what they can't have. So we need to look at diplomacy, and we need to show the world that we are at the forefront of that diplomacy, and we need to show that we won't tolerate any mass genocide on any scale anywhere in this world.
Thank you. Martin, finally.
Of course, you always have to preface this answer by saying I absolutely deplore violence or terrorism of any kind, and I certainly would not condone the actions of Hamas on October the 7th. But we talked about repercussions. Would anybody in this room think the Israeli response is in any way proportionate? There's been no attempt to look at ceasefire. There has been absolutely no attempt to negotiate for the hostages. Instead, we've had a blitz on the whole of Gaza and the mass murder of innocent people. And if you want to know what we would do, well, look at what was proposed by Helen Kay, who's a Green Party councillor on Somerset, in December, supported by a Liberal Democrat. We proposed that the council should ask for a ceasefire. It's not within our gift to make that happen, but we just want to send a message to our MPs. That was passed almost unanimously, by a large majority. And recently, we also asked for the council to evict Elbit, who are an Israeli weapons manufacturer, from a building that Somerset happens to have inherited, unfortunately. I don't think there's any way that Somerset Council should be profiteering from an organisation like that. If I was elected to Parliament, I would hold exactly the same views.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you. Right, back to Frome, and for our final question, which comes from Charles Nevin. If you could put your hand up. Okay.
Thanks.
No.
Could you tell me what is your vision for Frome?
Thank you. Thank you, Charles. I'm going to go back the other way. So, Martin.
Thank you.
The question that I have in front of me, which might be a bit easier to answer, is what will you do specifically for Frome?
A vision for Frome, I've been having a vision for Frome for about 40 years. I think one thing I would say, I'm so pleased that we have this new constituency, because Frome for many years has been on the edge of everything. The fourth largest town in Somerset, we were on the edge of Mendip, we were on the edge of Taunton and the Somerset Council. We're now actually in the middle of something, which is really nice. I also think we've got much more in common with our neighbours in Midsummer Norton, in Radstock, in Peasdown, and to the south. And it's a more natural area, and it's more compact geographically. So I'd go into Parliament, and what I would want to see, I don't want to see levelling up, I want to see us all levelled up. I want to see our needs met, and there's no doubt there's some really serious problems. I know Baines is short of money, but Somerset is on the very edge of bankruptcy, and we need the government to bail us out. And that would be my instant vision. We need our services restored, because they are absolutely appalling, and we're in dire straits.
Thank you. Gavin.
How do you compete with Martin when he lives here? It's pretty difficult. I live in Peasdown, and it's the biggest village in the southwest of England. You're the fourth biggest town. We're the biggest village, which is great. And like I said right at the very beginning of this hustings, I have been called a community activist, as well as lots of other things. My wife's in the front row and she'll vouch for that. I'm community focused, and I want to engage with people. I want to work with people. I want to find out what makes people tick, what makes Frome the fourth biggest town that it is, and why you all love this town so passionately. I've not come across somebody who's actually said a bad word, apart from Martin and Somerset Council, but I've not come across anybody anywhere that's had anything bad to say, whether that be here in Frome, Midsummer Norton, and creating them stronger ties of community and engaging and listening to people. I think that's the way forward. And it goes back to what I said before, where Robin nicked it, and that is we need to think locally, and we'll make that global difference if we all come together. One thing that every successive government has been really good at doing is creating divide, and we need to bring back unity with the people.
Thank you. Sean.
Thank you. Well, I guess what I want for Frome is the same as I want for my hometown with Midsummer Norton, for Radstock, for Peasdown, for East Pennard, for our local area. The list is endless. I want us to be able to access GPs. I want us to be able to access dental practices and get seen. I want us to be able to protect our own green space and not be dictated to. I want us to build social housing to solve our housing crisis. I want us to be able to care for our community, particularly the elderly people in our community. I want better public transports. I want better youth provision.
Please, let's hear from candidates.
But ultimately, what I'd like is for us to be represented correctly. I want our MP, whoever they are, to go to London with our set of demands and requests and have them listened to, rather than being told by a political party how they have to vote. And if they don't want to vote that way, then they're bullied by the political system of whips and deselection to vote with the party rather than with the residents. So ultimately, I want us to be represented correctly.
Thank you. Robin.
I think we've got an opportunity in Frome and East Somerset to be a real shining example to the rest of the country. If you look at the resources and the opportunities we have in this new constituency, then we can be that. Whether it's looking at renewable energy with our old coalfields and the opportunities that wind and solar gives us. Sean mentioned something that hasn't come up about public transport. It's in Labour's manifesto to give local councils the opportunity to franchise and to run their own bus services. So let's have a good local bus service across the whole of the constituency. I'm involved down in Radstock with a regeneration company where we put £250,000 into our new health centre, and we continue to have those conversations with health professionals on a regular basis to understand what they want and how they think the NHS should be running, and I want to see that extended out to Frome. And I guess as well, Sean says about, it's quite right, that an MP for Frome and East Somerset should be going to Westminster on behalf of Frome and East Somerset, not the other way around, not representing Westminster back here. And I suppose if there's any wish list I'd want, it was mentioned earlier about Singer Foundries. I understand that the lions on Trafalgar Square were built by that. I'd go to London and say, we want them back, please.
Thank you. Anna.
So the job of an MP is not to sit here telling you what their vision is for your town. It's to understand what your vision is for your town and help you deliver and advocate for that vision. So that would be my priority. But if you want to know some things I think you've told me are important to Frome in the time that I've been campaigning, I'll give you three. One is the kind of the state of high streets, and I mean both shops and banks and post offices. Clearly, Frome has some fantastic, desirable shops. It has the independent market. It's constantly being listed as this amazing town to visit and live in, and of course it is. But that belies, as we know, some real day-to-day challenges in terms of some empty shops. Speaking to the team that run Hunting Raven the other day, they were saying that they really think the mortgage interest crisis is starting to bite now, and people aren't realising that high streets are actually going into a real period of difficulty. So there's something around high streets and supporting high streets. There's something we haven't mentioned this evening is road safety. There is a frankly unacceptable number of road deaths happening on the A roads around Frome, and I cannot understand why the council can't sort that out. Seems to me a perfectly simple thing to get the police and the council in a room and say, how are we going to change this junction to make it safer? And that's an absolute priority on day one if I'm elected. And the third thing is supporting the many brilliant, brilliant groups that already are in Frome who are looking at water quality and amplifying their message back to government, and as Robin touched on, amplifying all the amazing good practice that happens in Frome to other areas of the constituency and indeed the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. David?
Me?
Yes, over to you, David.
I couldn't hear over the applause. Yeah, I mean, in talking to an awful lot of people all over the constituency over recent weeks, the one thing that stands out, although it will come as no surprise, they don't necessarily agree with me on everything, that people who live here are immensely proud to live here. Not only in Frome, Frome has a very fiery spirit, which is really, really nice and refreshing to see. But most of the focus, although we have our views on international issues, most of the focus is on local problems that we face. The High Street, certainly local businesses here in Frome are thriving. It is an example to a lot of towns in and around the southwest. But it is also the fact that there is much more that can be done. There is a big concern that I've found to do with local crime, specifically quite petty crime, antisocial behaviour and things. We certainly want to focus on an increased police presence on the streets of Frome and Midsummer Norton and Radstock to try and combat that. But I think, as has often been said, it is about the local people's vision for what they want their community to be. And it's very easy for politicians to sit here and say what we will do for you. But I think that one of the key things is actually there are hundreds of you here and there are a handful of us. It's something that actually it is the responsibility of everybody to do to make their local area better. So it is about a combined vision, not just our individual vision. So it's about working together as a community to see the kind of area you want to live in and then see that realised.
Thank you. Lucy.
So I'm going to sound like I'm really being a big suck-up now, but Frome has got one of the most organised town councils that you'll find anywhere in this country. They provide so much for this town. They work so hard, tirelessly for this town, and they are really well organised at it. There's a thriving arts and social scene. Sports and leisure are really good. But the question is, what do people here want? Because I can look at it. I come here all the time. I always have done. Love the market on the first Sunday of the month. Really enjoy that. But what do people here want? We have to listen to what you want for your town. This is your town. It's one of several towns in this seat. I obviously want to see things like the High Street, and I hear that on the doorsteps that people say, you know, we want those empty shops filled and we want more choice. We want to see that industries and businesses growing and thriving, providing apprenticeship opportunities, helping to keep our young people here in Frome. And also, somebody has mentioned veterans, and I do think it's a fair point. I am a veteran myself. I sit on the Armed Forces Covenant Board. I represent the Mendip area. If veterans want to speak to me, even if I'm not elected, please contact me, and I will do what I can.
Okay. Can we please let's... Okay, let's please settle down. There was an opportunity to submit questions. So that is it. I hope that the candidates' answers have given you a bit more of an insight into who they are and their policies and what they would do if they were elected. So I've just got a few thank yous. The first thank you is obviously to the candidates for their time tonight and also for standing. Our politics is not a particularly kind place, I think it's fair enough to say, and it takes a lot to put your head above the parapet, and it is really, really appreciated on that. So thank you. I also just want to thank a few people who don't get thanked very much, and that is the staff at, as has been said, at our very organised and well-run town hall, particularly Peter at the front for doing the timings, Rachel, Lucy in the comms team, and Paul as well for helping to organise it. They've done an amazing job. The candidates will hopefully be sticking around for a little bit, so if you have any more questions for them, then please do find them. But I also just want to thank all of you for coming tonight, for giving up your Tuesday night and being such a wonderful audience. And my final thing is to remind you all to please vote on Thursday. And obviously, if you've come tonight, you are quite likely to, but if you know of anyone who might struggle to get to the polls or who might not think that it's worth voting or, you know, or not be voting, please, please, please do everything you can to encourage as many people in Frome to vote and to exercise our right. It really does matter. So thank you very much. I think we're getting a official photo.